Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is assemble. And this verb was suggested by the viewer Bazian. And I want to thank Bazian for this great idea. If you have an idea, please feel comfortable sharing it with me. I love hearing from other viewers. So now let's take a look and discuss some of the meanings or the ways that we use this verb. The first way you might encounter a symbol is to gather together in one place for a common purpose. So with this first definition, right, you might think of bringing things together for a common purpose. Sometimes we use this to talk about food drives, right? Or other collections. We're assembling winter coats to give to needy individuals. Related to this would be our second definition. So to bring together people or things for a common purpose. So we might think of people coming together to protest something. They are assembling. They have this shared idea that something is unjust or something needs to be changed, and they're kind of collecting voices to raise awareness to a particular problem. A third way the verb assemble gets used can mean to fit together the separate components or parts of an object. So many times people will think of manufacturing, the way we make and produce things, right? One person might be responsible for doing something, connecting one part, then it goes to the next person who adds yet another, right? And through that process, we are assembling a particular good. A fourth way the verb assemble gets used is around computer science and that idea of translating a program from a higher level programming language into machine code. Now, this fourth definition is very, very specific. This is not my area of expertise, so you're not going to see many examples of this from me. But if this is an area in which you're working in, you might hear this verb used more consistently, or you might see it as part of written instructions. For now, though, you should know that assemble is a regular verb. If you want to make the progressive form of this verb, you're going to drop the E on the end, then add ing to form assembling. The past tense and the participle forms of this verb can be made by just adding the letter D, since this verb already ends in an E. Now, while the spelling ends in an E, our base verb actually ends in an L sound, assemble, right? And L sounds are voiced. This means our ED ending is just going to make a D sound, and I'm not going to add an extra syllable as I say it. So the past tense and the participle forms of the verb should sound like this: assembled, assembled. Okay. Now, you might be happy to know we don't have any additional phrasal verbs that we need to study at this moment, so instead, we'll move on and do a little verb tense practice. Today, we're going to work on making some sentences in the imperative and the present progressive. Let's start with the imperative. In the imperative, we are giving a command, right? So we're speaking to one person, right? A singular you, or a plural you if it's a group of people. And in the affirmative or in the positive, we're telling them to do a particular action, or in the negative, we're telling them not to do a particular action. So the imperative is rather unique because we do not have a stated subject. So we don't begin our sentences with you and then the verb, right? We just can start with the verb. So you're going to see that in my affirmative example here, right? We're giving a command. Assemble in the conference room about 15 minutes before the meeting so we can make final preparations for the presentation, right? So this is a pretty formal and frankly a little bit of a harsh command, right? If I heard someone say to say this to me, right? It would make me a little bit nervous, right? It sounds very serious. Sounds like, oh no, are we in trouble? Are we not prepared? Fortunately, I do not have a supervisor that speaks like this. But you might encounter this, right? There, you can see that verb we're being told to gather in, right? Everyone meet up in this particular place. Now you can also make negative imperatives to do that. Start with do not and then the base verb, or you can use the contraction don't and the base verb. Here's another example. Don't assemble this without reading the instructions. So maybe you're someone who buys something, maybe it's a piece of furniture that requires some parts, and you just have a really good sense of how things kind of fit together and in what order they should be done. But with some people, right, this is a bad idea. They're going to do things and they're going to end up with maybe some parts that aren't attached or aren't attached in the right place. So here, someone is giving that strict command. Don't begin to join these parts together before you've read the directions. Now, many times I have students tell me that using the imperative feels very forward, if not even rude, just to tell someone to do a particular action. So I always like to remind people you can always soften things or make things a little more polite by adding the word please. You can put it either at the beginning of a sentence or at the end. You don't need it both places, though. You can do this in the affirmative and the negative as well. Now, because we're talking about commands, we don't have any yes or no questions to practice. So instead, we can move on and talk a little bit about the present progressive. Many teachers and textbooks will also call this the present continuous, and that's just fine. It means exactly the same thing. In both the present progressive or the present continuous, we are talking about either actions that are happening now or actions that are incomplete during a time period that hasn't finished yet. The reason I like using present progressive is I try and help my students remember 2 P's in the verb means you need 2 parts to your verb. So we'll be using the present form of be and the ing form of the verb. Now, be has 3 forms in the simple present, so we're going to have to pay attention to our subject here. If our subject is I, use am, and then that ing form the verb. But if the subject is you, we, or they, use are, A-R-E, and then the ing form the verb. Or if your subject is he, she, or it, use is, I-S, and then that ing form the verb. You can see an example here. The new coach is assembling her coaching staff for the upcoming season. Right? So many professional teams have a large number of coaches. So here, this is that idea of bringing people together to form a coaching staff. But also, you might think of kind of trying to have the right parts in the place, people who understand offense really well or defense or other special parts to the game. Now, if we want to make negative present progressive sentences, again, we're going to pay attention to our subject. We're going to have our subject. We'll have a form of be that matches. So again, we've got to pick between those 3, but then insert not before your ing form the verb. Let's take a look at another example. The baker isn't assembling the cake until he arrives at the reception hall. Okay, so maybe you can imagine a cake with many tiers or levels, right? Something very intricate. And this sentence is telling us this action is not going to be happening until the person arrives at maybe this is a wedding reception, and the particular place where this event is going to be held, right? So we're not going to try and put it all together, all of its parts or components, and have it risk maybe falling over as it's transported. Finally, let's look at making a yes or no question in the present progressive. To do that, start with your form of be, right? Whatever form matches your subject, that subject comes next, then the ing form the verb. Here's another example. Are machines assembling these packages? Right? So someone might want to know, right? Is this ongoing right now? Maybe they're being put together by hand. All of that is a possibility. Now, let's take a look at some words that are related to our verb assemble. And the first word we're going to discuss today is the noun form of the word assembly. Okay? This noun can have a number of different meanings. We're going to talk about 5 of them. So the noun assembly could refer to a group of people who have gathered together in a particular place for some common purpose. An example of this: there will be an assembly of scholars on campus later this week. So maybe they're gathering together to discover the sort of newest or latest and greatest research in a particular area. A second way you'll hear assembly used is to describe generally a lower legislative house in some U.S. states. So if you have any knowledge of U.S. government, it's okay if you don't, but at our federal or national level, our legislative body has 2 parts, the Senate and the House of Representatives. And then at the state level, right, many states follow that same pattern. They also use Senate and Representatives, but in some states, instead of House of Representatives, you might hear the General Assembly. So an example of that would be in the state of Indiana. You might hear somebody say, she is running for the Indiana General Assembly. So she, essentially what that means is wants to be a state representative. Another way to use the noun assembly is to talk about the action of gathering together as a group for some common purpose. An example of this could be, freedom of assembly is a guaranteed right. So it's, at least here in the United States, we have the right to peacefully assemble. It's guaranteed in the First Amendment of our Constitution. And it's that idea. We can get together and gather and discuss, plan, sometimes protest, do things like a sit-in, a picket. All of those things are protected under that right. Another way we will use this noun assembly is to talk about kind of a regular gathering. You might think of this sort of like a meeting of teachers and students at a particular school. So some schools will say there will be an all assembly at, an all school assembly at 10 a.m. So when I was growing up, I feel like maybe once a month we would have this. All of our different grades would come together, we'd sit on the gym floor, and there might be a speaker, might be some kind of presentation, but it was something, I think, designed maybe to bring us all together, sometimes to share information, and sometimes they were fun and enjoyable as well. Another way to use the noun assembly, and the last way we're going to discuss today, is to talk about the action of fitting together component parts of some sort of machine or another object. An example of this: the car assembly plant is hiring right now. So here we're talking about a place where they put all the individual component parts of a car together to make something that functions and drives and operates. Another related word you might encounter is the noun assembler. This is a person or an organization that assembles, could be a machine or some other parts. An example of this: the world's biggest contract vehicle assemblers considering where to build its next plant. So here we're again referring to more of an organization rather than a single individual here that builds these massive manufacturing plants and puts together or assembles automobiles. One last word that you might encounter today, that is, and I'm going to group it together. You might hear assemblyman, assemblywoman, or assembly person, right? So long time ago, before we consistently had female legislators, it was more common to hear assemblymen. To be a bit more open today. You might hear the word person used, but we're just talking about someone who is a member of a legislative body. And again, not all US states are going to use this term. You might hear senator, representative, but this is another title that is given. So an example of this might be Assemblywoman Smith will speak about affordable housing later today. So when we're using that as part of someone's title, you are going to see that capitalized. Okay. Thanks again for this great idea. I thank you all for watching. Have a great day.